many of you know someone who's had surgery on their heart? I do. Several people in my family, for different reasons, have had surgery on their heart. And it takes a long time, particularly if it's open heart surgery, it takes a long time for the person to recover. It takes time for the bones to knit themselves back together. It takes time for the muscles and nerves that have been cut through to heal. It takes time for the heart itself to recover from this shocking experience that it's had. I learned recently that when someone has heart surgery, they might experience something called the cardiac blues. When someone has heart surgery, particularly heart surgery, so I suppose it happens sometimes with hip surgery or knee surgery or brain surgery too, but particularly with after heart surgery, people find themselves often feeling just a little bit blue, just a little bit depressed. It's hard to get going, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. It's hard to find enjoyment in the things that you once enjoyed. It's hard sometimes to find a reason to keep going. These cardiac blues, as they're called, can affect up to 75% of people who've had an operation on their heart, 3 in 4 people. And most of the time, those blues go away after a while. The person's body heals, their mind and spirit start to heal too. But in 20% of people who've had heart surgery and experience the cardiac blues, these blues turn into something that lasts a little bit longer. They turn into what's called cardiac depression. There's a name for it, cardiac depression, or even cardiac distress. Not the distress of the heart itself, but the distress of the cardiac patient. It turns out that cutting through the heart of someone can cut through the heart of someone. And both of those kinds of cuts, both the physical and the spiritual, can take a year or maybe even longer to recover from. The scripture that Ken read this morning tells the story of a people whose heart has been cut through, the story of a people whose heart has been broken. As he mentioned before he read the scripture in the book of Jeremiah, the prophet is trying to make sense of the worst thing that's ever happened to his people. God had promised that the people would enter the land that God had prepared for them and stay there forever. They could worship freely. They could be near the temple. They could celebrate all of the things that God had done for them. And then, seemingly without warning, and certainly without it making any sense, the people's land was invaded. Their government was taken over by people who didn't make any sense. And the people of Israel, most of them, were literally led into exile in Babylon. And those who stayed behind looked at the government of their land and thought, what did we do? We must have done something wrong. What did we do to deserve this? Why is God breaking our hearts? And why would the God who promised to love us, why would God let this happen to us? Prophets are famously long-winded in telling the truth and trying to make sense about what God has done. And Jeremiah, called the weeping prophet, Jeremiah takes 29 chapters in the Bible of lament and complaint and shaking his fist at the heavens, trying to make sense of why God would let this happen to his people. And then, after 29 chapters of lament, the very end of Jeremiah, chapters 30 through 33, Jeremiah says, this really bad thing has happened. And it does not look like there's going to be a quick fix. This exile is going to last for a while, so we're going to have to live with it. And then the very end of this book is called Jeremiah's Book of Consolation, where he stops complaining and starts making sense of how God might still be loving God's people, even when they are so far from anything that made their lives make sense. So Jeremiah acknowledges, prophet's job is to speak for God, right? Jeremiah acknowledges that God has watched people pluck down and break down and overthrow and destroy, and that God will also watch over God's people as they build and they plant and they continue. God has made a covenant with them, it's true, to lead them out of the land of Egypt and into this place of liberation. But promises, even if they're not broken, can be made anew. So Jeremiah says, the days are coming, says God, when I will make a new covenant, a new promise with the land of Israel. And in this new promise, God says through Jeremiah, God will put the law within them and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, the scripture says, and they will be my people. In this new promise, God's promise hasn't been broken. It just has an addendum. You don't need to be near the temple, Jeremiah is telling his people. You don't need to have a government that looks just like you. You don't need to have all the things you thought you needed to have in order to be close to God. Because God has written God's law, the law of love, on your heart. And your hearts go with you no matter where you are. Friends, I don't know about you, but there are days this year when I too have felt brokenhearted. There have been days this year where I have felt betrayed, where it has felt like all of the things that I thought would last forever are disappearing before my very eyes. And there have been days this year where I have looked around and thought, this does not feel like the land that I was born in. This does not feel like my government. This does not feel like my country. There have been days when I have been brokenhearted. And there may have been days on your brokenhearted days where you have wondered where God is in the midst of all of that sorrow and heartache, when all of the things that you thought would last forever seem to be disappearing before your very eyes. So I wonder if this new covenant that Jeremiah brings forth, it's not so new anymore. We tend to dismiss things that are this ancient, but I wonder if this new covenant is worth paying attention to now as if it were something new. What if the laws that are being written by our government, as important as they are not ultimate? What if God has put the law of God's love within us, written it on our hearts? What if the deep truths that we know can carry us through, even as those people in our lives who are supposed to be beacons of truth sometimes speak hate and lies and deceit? What if the law of love has been written on our hearts? What if truth has been written on our hearts? When you look at your own heart, when you think about the truest truth that you know, the thing that you cling to no matter what is going on in the world, What do you find? What is it that God has written on your heart that can't be taken away? And what is it that reminds you of that truest truth, even when other voices in the world seek to drown that voice out? When someone is recovering from surgery on their heart, some depression is to be expected. And for almost everyone who goes through heart surgery, that depression lasts a while, but it doesn't last forever. Just like any kind of brokenheartedness, we know what helps someone who's going through depression and distress and despair. And so doctors will tell people, it would help if you moved your body a little bit. It would help if you ate good food and drank water. It would help if you sat in the sunlight, even when it is in short supply. It would help if you were sometimes around other people and not just sitting in your room alone. Whether our heart has been broken through medical intervention or through the things that happen to all of us that break our hearts in so many different ways, we know what helps. We know we can trust that even when our heart has been broken, we can trust in the hearts of other people. Being around other people helps no matter what has broken your heart. Because when we have no hope, when I have no hope, you might. When you have no hope, I can hold hope for you. When the words that have been written on your heart maybe start to fade away, get a little tarnished, get hard to read and understand. When that happens to you, when that happens to me, we can lend each other our hearts. And we can say, I know those words are hard to read for you right now, but look, I have a fresh copy right here. You can borrow my heart. It speaks of the same law that yours does. And will remind you that the love of God is strong as anything. Love is strong as death. Christian writer Anne Lamott talks about this idea of God writing God's law on our hearts, and she quotes this old Jewish story where someone says to the rabbi, "Why would God write on our hearts and not in our hearts? That makes more sense, Rabbi. Why does it say on and not in?" She says, the rabbi answered, "Only God can put scripture inside someone's heart. But you can put it on your heart. And then when your heart breaks, God's holy words will fall inside." Friends, when your heart feels hard, when your heart feels cynical, when your heart has been cut through, when your heart has been broken for what feels like the 1,000th time, I pray that you will remember the words of love and strength and joy and hope that God has written on your heart. This hope that I have, the world didn't give to me. This hope that I have, the world didn't give to me. This hope that I have, the world didn't give to me. The world didn't give it, the world can't take it away.